Good afternoon. My name is Victoria DiFrancesco Soto, and I am the Dean of the Clinton School of Public Service. And just before this event got started, I was chatting with a good friend of mine, one of our Dean's Advisory Board members, Gayatri Agnew, who you'll hear from in just a minute. And she's like, I can feel the health, the civic health of Arkansas already improved from the energy in this room. I could not agree more, Gayatri. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to the release of the inaugural Arkansas Civic Health Index report. This work is the product of a very large village. It is the product of educational entities. It is the product of community organizations and foundations. It is the product of state and local governmental entities, and it is the product of a deep passion and commitment to civic engagement across the state of Arkansas. Civic engagement is the connective tissue, not just of our society, but of our democracy. And now, more than ever, we need to refocus on our civic health, because like with our physical health, right? We shouldn't just pay attention to it when we're sick, when we've got high blood pressure, when we're not feeling well. Like with our physical health, we need upkeep. We need to take the vitamins, eat healthy, do the exercise, do the yoga. Especially because when we're looking at our civic health, we're not in a great place. We haven't been doing the upkeep. And this has led to some very worrisome outcomes. Crises have emerged that threaten the future of the nation. The US is at an inflection point. We're at a fork in the road. And we know which road we're going to follow, right? There's no question here. But the road that we need to follow is not an easy one. It's going to take all of us in this room and the multiplier effect of all of us in this room giving 110%. And I know I'm going to seem overly dramatic in saying this, but I truly do believe this. Failure is not an option. So, what are the actionables? What do we do? What is the game plan? I'm a gal of action. I'm a can-do person, as are all of you in this room. Well, the question to begin with is not what is the game plan, but what are the game plans? Because we are a nation made up of 50 states, and within each of these states, we have thousands of localities. So what we need to do is, in order to get a handle on our civic health, we need to disaggregate before we can aggregate up. So with any major project, you first need a strategy, you need an analysis, what are the problems, and how do we confront these issues? And until now, here in the state of Arkansas, we did not have a comprehensive analysis. We did not have a comprehensive game plan. Now we do. Thanks to the Winthrop Rockefeller Institute, shout out to Janet Harris and your team, to our partners at EngageAR, Arkansas Peace and Justice Memorial Movement, the Central Arkansas Library System, the Arkansas Community Foundation, the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation, the AFP Foundation, the Arkansas Center for Research and Economics, the National Conference on Citizenship, the amazing Clinton School faculty, staff, students, and alumni. Our Clinton Presidential Center partners, Dr. J. Barth, Dr. Mike Hemphill, Stephanie Street, and countless folks who have participated in this through participating in focus groups, in interviews, in surveys, in studies. A special note of thanks to my team, to Patrick Newton, our Marketing and Communications Director, and to Dr. Robert Richards, who has spearheaded this work. This project has been over a year in the making. And today, however, is not a conclusion, but it's actually a restart to what you're going to be hearing about toward the end, and Janet is going to be talking about that. We're going to be hearing from Dr. Chul Park, one of the lead authors of the study, about the report, and then we get to discuss the what do we do about it part, the roadmap, with a rock star panel. They are my Taylor Swifts and my Bad Bunnies of civic engagement in this state, and we get to spend time with them today. But before I turn it over, I want to give a shout out to some special guests who are key stakeholders in the civic engagement space. Ross Duvall from Heartland Forward, Robert Burns, the Walton Family Foundation, Dr. Derek Slagle, one of our partners at the University of Arkansas Little Rock, Nate Coulter from CALS, Dr. Michael Moore from the University of Arkansas System, Senator Joyce Elliott, Dr. Chris Jones, and many, many others who, by showing up today, you demonstrate what civic engagement means to you and to our community. At the close of this event, as I said, you'll be hearing from my friend and colleague, Janet Harris, because this is just the beginning. This is not just a celebration like, woohoo, we launched the report. No, because now it's time to roll up our sleeves and do the hard work of civic engagement. And nothing gives me more pleasure than to turn it over now to Dr. Chul Park, a professor at the Clinton School of Public Service, as well as the director of the Open Governance Lab. Chul.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate your presence and your interest in our research project in terms of Civic Health Index report in Arkansas. It is my privilege and pleasure to share our research finding with you today. I'd like to recognize the main authors of our research report for their significant contributions. As you can see here, Dr. Joyce Ajay, also Dr. Robert Richards. Also, we have two wonderful student authors from the Clinton School, Kwame Abdul-Bey, as well as Brittany Chu. Sorry, I cannot. Could you help me, Patrick? Page next. Okay, thank you. So as you know, the importance of public participation has been underscored by numerous scholars around the world. They believe that public participation can enhance transparency, effectiveness, as well as collaborative nature of public service. However, our research team identified a significant gap in the information and the understanding of current status of civic engagement in Arkansas. As a result of our understanding, so the realization to this realization led to the current our research project with the aim of conducting a comprehensive assessment in terms of overall quality of civic engagement in Arkansas. Civic engagement is a complex concept, so encompassing various components, as you know. Therefore, our assessment covered a variety of factors related to the civic engagement. These include voter registration turnout, also public interest, public trust in the government, as well as access to government information. Also, we consider social connectedness within the communities and more. In order to conduct this study, we gathered and analyzed a substantial amount of data from multiple sources. Given the time constraint, I will be only able to discuss the key findings from this research project. These findings present a mixed picture, revealing both positive and negative aspects of civic engagement in Arkansas. One of the significant findings pertains to voter registration and turnout in Arkansas. In this regard, we analyzed data from presidential and state midterm election as well as local election over the past decades. Our analysis revealed that in terms of political participation in the 2020 US presidential election, Arkansas ranked 51st among all 50 states and Washington, D.C. This pattern was consistent in recent midterm and local elections as well. However, on a positive note, we observed a significant increase in voter turnout among college students when you compare the data from 2016 and 2020 elections. Public trust could be potentially a significant factor in explaining the lower levels of political participation in Arkansas. Arkansans have expressed lower levels of trust in the federal government compared to the average US citizen. Similarly, the level of trust that Arkansans have in other people also falls below the national average. However, an interesting finding is that Arkansans exhibit higher levels of trust in election officials compared to the national average. Social connectedness is an essential element that can enhance participatory democracy. In this context, our research highlighted several positive aspects of civic engagement in Arkansas. Our research found that residents of Arkansas, compared to the average US citizen, they made more donation to the charitable or religious organizations. Arkansans showed a higher degree of involvement in social groups, as well as more frequent interactions with family and friends compared to the average US citizen. The availability of government information, public information that disseminated by county and local government, very, very important prerequisites for civic engagement, as you know. So especially our research evaluated the online information disseminated by local government. We focused on fiscal, administrative, as well as political web transparency. Our findings indicate consistent improvement in all three facets of government transparency. Notably, there was a substantial increase in fiscal information transparency. Finally, our research findings have led us to formulate practical recommendations for both state and local government, as well as community-based organizations. In this study, we identified several barriers to voting. These include long wait times at polling stations, also a lack of transportation to these locations. As such, it is essential to simplify both voting and voter registration processes. Scholars have highlighted that when ordinary citizens engage in public deliberation, they tend to take a greater interest in public matters, public issues. So it is important to expand opportunities for Arkansas residents to partake in civic deliberation discussion in terms of various policy matters. Thank you for your attention. This is very brief, our overview in terms of our research project. You can get much more details from our research report, as you can see here, there. Yeah, if you have any questions or recommendation for us, feel free to let me know. Okay, following the conclusion of my presentation, we will proceed with a panel discussion. So I'm pleased to introduce the moderator and panelists for this session. Our discussion will be guided by Dr. J. Barth, who is currently serving as the director of the Clinton Presidential Library and Museum. We are also honored to have 4 exceptional panelists joining us today. Gayatri Agnew, the Senior Director and Head of the Accessibility Center of Excellence at Walmart. Shana Chaplin, previously the Director of EngageAR Arkansas. Jeff Coates, the Research and Evaluation Director at the National Conference on Citizenship. Lisa Hicks Gilbert, the current Mayor of Elaine, Arkansas. Let us extend a warm welcome to our esteemed moderator and panelist.
We just start talking. So do not play with the microphones. So we do have a number of seats now that are opened up. So if you're standing against the wall and want to come have a seat, we encourage that. I want to echo Vicki in a couple of respects. I'm sitting in a room with my favorite human beings, my favorite Arkansans for sure. These are folks who care deeply about creating a more healthy Arkansas in a lot of ways, but especially in terms of our civic health. And I also want to congratulate the team that's worked so hard on this for so long, and kudos to it is so important that we have this benchmark. It's not all good news, as we'll talk about, but it is a benchmark, and it shows where we'll be able to track where we're headed, and that's really important. So gotta get these. Speaking of gadgets, gotta get these guys on here. So I want to get started with Jeff, and first, if you'll just talk a little bit about this effort nationally to track civic health, but then talk a little bit more about how these numbers in this report kind of differ and are similar in other ways to other places around the country.
Okay, thank you. I'm Jeff Coates. I'm with the National Conference on Citizenship. We started the Civic Health Index in 2008 with the passing of the Edward Kennedy Serve America Act. Part of it was that we wanted to ensure that we had data around civic education, civic health, civic participation across the country. So in the act, it was written in that AmeriCorps, formerly the Corporation for National and Community Service, would actually fund the data to the census, but we at NCOC would actually be able to have that data. We are part of the act as well. We have an MOU, long term. So we have done these reports since 2008. We are coming up on our 100th report later, hopefully next year. This is our 36th state. So we're very proud of a new report, a new state, because our goal is to be in every state and the District of Columbia. And just looking at this report, maybe perhaps Dr. Park and I should have actually discussed what we were going to talk about, because a lot of the things that he mentioned were the issues that I saw when analyzing data, reviewing the data. As you have heard, there are some challenges, but let me talk about the positives first. The positives is this report itself. It's a starting point. A lot of our reports are great ways and great ways to actually start the discussion with every citizen in Arkansas. You have recommendations, but think of the report itself as a recommendation as well, as a tool to start those conversations with political officials, citizens, everyone. Also, Arkansas, you are socially connected. You spend time with family and friends. Those are important things to do. They build that social capital that's necessary to build that trust in in not only the political system, but the community itself to address issues and to address challenges. A challenge, obviously, is the voter registration and turnout. I think you are 51 out of 51. I would, just think of them, think of it as a challenge, an opportunity. You can only go up. And there's a lot of examples of ways to move up, and I will talk about that later, and I shared it with the writers. Looking at the policies that are successful around in other states, looking at what actually hinder people from getting out and voting or registering. These are all they could all be overcome very easily, and I don't see Arkansas being at the bottom for a very long time after this report. I truly believe everyone that's motivated here, everyone that's here, and those watching live streaming, I think I'm very encouraged. So,
Great. Jeff, well, you're talking about other states. We're now the 36th state to undertake this report. What are the states out there that we might see as something of our role model in terms of states that have really used this data in a consistent manner and made obvious improvements as a result of it?
Yeah, I'll mention two, and one just recently because of the passing of Sandra Day O'Connor last week. The Sandra Day O'Connor Act in Florida, which mandated civic education in schools, was passed in 2010 following their Florida CHI report. Every report was laid down, put on the legislator's desk prior to the vote, and it showed how poorly Florida at that time was doing. It passed. That model was taken to Illinois, and they now have civic education because of the Civic Health Report and the partnership. Those that passed that went to Illinois and their civic health partners and discussed how they did that. One of the newer one is Indiana. Indiana always ranked in the low state. I think that's probably the closest, the low voter registration at the national level. And what they did is they did a report in 2018, said, we're going to change, we're going to implement stuff. They tried to implement stuff. It wasn't successful in 2020. They did another report. But in between 2018 and 2020, the lieutenant governor set up a task force for civic education and looking at voter turnout. And that is still going on. It's a 6-year plan, including a curriculum, accreditation, all these wonderful things. 2020 wasn't what they wanted voter turnout. So that report in 2020, they actually looked at every policy in every state to see what is successful and what is not, and is making recommendations to their state government. So these are substantial, hard tactics to move forward to make a state stronger, better in these areas.
Great. And we'll talk a little bit more about civic education later on. But I want to talk about voter turnout in more detail first. And obviously, it's an area where Arkansas has severe challenges, particularly with certain subsets of our state's residents. But there's also some good news in the report, especially with younger voters. There's some pretty happy news here. And Mayor Gilbert, this is an area where you've really, focused a lot of your energy on your pathway to elected office for yourself. Your work really began with voter activation. Could you share your perspective on, why Arkansas has such challenges in this regard, and what are you seeing, especially with younger residents, that maybe is worth providing some roadmaps for other parts of the state?
With younger residents, in terms of getting them out to vote, simply asking them, and then ask, why are they not voting? And that's what we found with, just engaging them. We always say the children are our future, then we need to engage them in the present. And I think that's one of the ways in which we've failed in engaging our young people. And then in this age of technology, where that is the way they get most of their information, is on social media. and finding a way to engage them in that regard. And, in making sure that we have ways for them to do that. And that was one of the challenges we found in Elaine, was because of lack of broadband. That was a big challenge. We were still doing flyers, not being able to, because we didn't have consistent, reliable internet. So that's one of the ways in which we found a challenge in engaging our young people. So we just did old-fashioned ground, grassroots walking, going to the park, meeting them where they're out playing basketball, and engaging them that way. And in that way, we gained their trust, because we went to where they were and asked them the questions that they, able to trust us. And then, one of the things, another way we did was we included them in the process. It was important during the election, not ask them to come out and vote, but making sure that we had those individuals there as part of our campaign. We had one of our poll watchers in her 20s, showed her the process of how you become a poll watcher, fill your paperwork out, take it to the county clerk's office. And she sat there in the, from beginning to end. She took an hour lunch break and she was there. And then at the end, she asked the poll official, to make sure she posted up the election, the numbers. And then she also asked her, how many provisional ballots do you have? How many provisional ballots are you taking back to the courthouse? And she counted them, fill out her paperwork. And not only did we have a young person in there working, but the young people that came out to vote and who knew her, they were watching and they saw she was part of that process. And that was encouraging. So that was a way for us to engage them and get more people out to vote. I know that the numbers sound dismal, but we had more people come out to vote in Elaine in the history of Elaine. Yes. Yes.
Great. Well, thank you for that work and for your insights. Another area where we do have challenges is it's a word you've already said, which is trust. And social trust is obviously a real glue in a democracy. And Gayatri, in addition to your day job, of course, that was mentioned earlier, you also are an elected official in Bentonville. And could you reflect a little bit on what you see as some of the particular challenges in this space of social trust in Arkansas, and how it has negative ramifications in our communities?
Sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Barth. It's a pleasure to be here. I do have the honor to sit on Bentonville's City Council in addition to working at Walmart. So kind of an interesting lens through which I see civic health and civic participation across the state of Arkansas. And I sit in the Office of Belonging at Walmart. It was previously our Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And there I run an Office of Accessibility, which is about including people with disabilities in our shopping experience and our employment experience. And at the very core of the question about trust, I think, is the question about when and how you feel included. You either are a part of or you are outside of a process. And the interesting thing about, I think, campaigns and elections and politics is nobody really likes it, except for those of us in this room. But it isn't inherently a process that makes you feel included, empowered, and intelligent. Right? You hear a lot of like, did you know, this happened? Do you know that occurred at our city council meeting? Have you heard about this? And to be really candid, the answer most of the time is I have no idea what you're talking about. And rather than allow it to be true, that most of the time folks don't have the capacity within their busy daily lives to consume the volume of information that you nerds have in this room. I love you guys so much. And we have to let that be okay. And I think at the very core of this question of social trust is about individual dignity and respect. And people aren't unaware of the zoning vote from last Tuesday because they don't care. They're unaware because they were getting their kids to school and they were feeding them dinner and they were working hard. And so there's this really deep underlying question of why is it that folks have not been given the opportunity, capacity, and time to be engaged in their community. And so I think sometimes we get the trust question backwards, that it comes from a place of lack of care, but I think it actually comes from a place of lack of the institutions themselves, making it simple and easy and respectful for anybody, irrespective of how much they know or don't know about what's going on in their community, to be a part of the decision-making process in that community. And the last thing I'll say on that is, in business, we love to use big words. I don't know why, but we do. And at Walmart, we talk a lot about psychological safety. And what that means is I feel safe saying I don't know. And the way that I have led as an elected leader in Bentonville is to try to make everyone in our community feel really safe saying, I don't know how that works. I don't know who makes that decision. I don't know how to influence that outcome. And to say, all right, it's okay. I didn't know before I got elected. Let's talk about it and let's figure that out together. And so I think this question of trust really comes down to, where are we making space to listen? Just like you said, Mayor, where are we showing up where people already are? Nobody wants, the smartest person in the room. That's not how you don't trust someone who knows more than you. You trust someone who listens to you. And so I think at the core of the question about trust is a question about listening. And then if I could just throw every governmental institution in the state of Arkansas under the bus, I would say we're not very good listeners. We're just not very good listeners. And part of that is we're still listening like it's 1975 and everyone's reading a newspaper, and that's not reality. So I think there are tons of things that local government can do to be more inclusive and responsive and transparent with our residents that would help improve social trust.
Great. Super. A lot going on there that we'll get back to, especially in terms of how our local institutions can be better. I want to spend some time as we begin to talk about solutions. But Shana, you've been in this space for a long time, working on issues related to volunteerism. And when it comes to volunteerism in this report, there's some really good news and some really challenging news. The good news is Arkansans give a lot of their selves, a lot of their resources to volunteer endeavors. We make a lot of financial contributions to groups. We actually also do a pretty good job of joining groups, but we don't spend a lot of time once we're there. We don't dedicate our time to working to make those groups achieve the goals they're intended to achieve. You've done this work for a long time. Did this track what you have seen? And can you explain this apparent disconnect or this complexity in the volunteer space?
Yeah, it did track, and the data hasn't changed a lot over the course of time in this space. And so I think, there's a couple of things happening. I mean, I think it correlates with trust. And I think we have to think about our nonprofit sector and sort of the same thing. How are we communicating? How are we engaging people? Do they know our story? Do they understand the impact of their work? And frankly, we haven't done a very good job of that in this state. And so I think, one, it's a challenge for the sector itself in that space. I think then in terms of people themselves, we do have a lot to be really proud of. Arkansans are very generous and have a clear desire to be engaged. So I think we, again, have to challenge ourselves to think about how are we engaging them. And I think one group, one sector we've sort of left out of the dialogue over the course of time has been our corporate and our business. People have to work. We have to go to jobs. We have to work. We have families. We have kids in school. And so what can we do to better engage our corporate community to allow for opportunity to serve? And we know a lot of the new data, especially related to Gen Zs, that's what they want. They are looking for a work-life balance that provides them an opportunity to have influence through their employment. And so those things matter to them. I'm not going to say more than salary, but equal to salary. And so I think we really have to, again, think about who we have at the table. Who are we listening to? Who are we involving in the dialogue? We have a tendency for the nonprofit sector to function in silo from corporate sector, from political sector, and we can't do that. And I think it's important in this space, especially, to also be very mindful of, had we been keeping an eye on this data, if people outside of the nonprofit sector had been keeping an eye on this data, election turnout and voter registration data wouldn't surprise us, because it doesn't begin there. It begins with engagement in your local community. It begins with civic education and an understanding of what the political system is, how it works, how you can be involved. We learn about our local social issues through our volunteerism. And so we can't ignore that as a piece of the puzzle. And if we don't improve that number at the base, to me, it's the foundation, then those other things aren't going to follow. Voter registration might, but then people may not actually show up to vote. So we have to teach people how to be engaged.
Excellent. So a question that came in from one of the audience members in advance of this was about faith communities. And obviously a lot of our volunteer organizations have some linkage to faith, either overtly or indirectly. Could you talk a little bit about the role that faith communities are playing in promoting and enhancing civic engagement in Arkansas?
I mean, I think we do. We have we're the Deep South. We're still considered Bible Belt in a lot of places. We've got diversification in our faith network, but those are strong. And I think when you look at some of that neighboring number, a lot of that is driven by participation in a religion, participation with a religious group. And we have some large faith-based organizations. And we have seen in recent years under political leadership a push for partnership with faith-based organizations in some of our system issues. And that has worked well for them. It has, I think on some level, it addresses some of the trust for some people. There's a level of trust there. But again, I think even in that space, we have to really continue to look at that sector. We have to continue to look at how people are engaging in that space. We have to think about diversification and equity in that space, because even our volunteer numbers, while not necessarily strong, have stayed the same. We still have inequities in who volunteers that we can't ignore. And so I think there's just an incredible opportunity to be mindful of that, to bring them to the table. I think they have been at the table quite a bit in this state. And so again, I think continuing to build on that, but thinking about who else do we bring to the table.
Great, great. So, in some ways, perhaps the best news in this report is how thoroughly neighborly Arkansans are. They actually do spend a lot of time with the people closest to them in their proximity. But the problem is, of course, there's neighborliness, but it's not connecting to broader types of civic engagement where folks think beyond their immediate sphere, but think about their broader community and their broader state. And I want to get everybody's thoughts on this, but I'll start with Gayatri. How do we snowball that neighborliness that's real into deep connectedness that'll actually turn into broader civic engagement when it turns into the voting booth, the communications with elected officials, et cetera. But I do want to hear everybody's thoughts on this, but I'll start with you, Gayatri.
Yeah, so let's start with what's actually going on in a neighborhood. And if you've seen me speak in Bentonville City Council, I love to talk about flushing the toilet and turning on the lights, because it doesn't get more core to your home and your block and your neighborhood than that. What happens when the power goes out? What happens when the sewer line backs up? What happens when a tree falls? Like that is quite literally as local as you can get. And yet all three of those events or instances are directly influenced and affected by how the city council, at least in Bentonville, is able to respond and support that event. So we've spent a lot of time in Bentonville talking about neighborhoods and talking about blocks and encouraging residents to get to know their neighbors, and then trying to just connect the dots about why. I think sometimes when we go right from neighborliness all the way to an act that was passed in Congress, there's a lot of space in between. And it's really hard to understand how that comes back to translate to how I'm able to effectively get my family out the door in the morning and get my kids ready for school. If I can't turn on the lights and flush my toilet, not very quickly at all. And so, just really, it's that like all politics is local. And I think I would say that before I got elected to city council. And now that I serve on city council, I'm like, y'all have no idea, like everything that happens in your house, even where your house is built and what that street looks like and whether your street light comes on in the evening, all of that is being driven by your local government. And so just the opportunity to have those conversations again in non-threatening ways and in ways where you're asking the question, what is it that you want or need that perhaps you're not getting in your neighborhood or community? And then, I think the last piece is children. I think that children are the absolute connective tissue across those neighborhoods because adults are just a little bit less likely to run across the street and run up to the door of their neighbor and share something with them. But kids will do that, right? And so it's like, how do you take that metaphorical civic activism that is those kids when they run around a neighborhood? They'll do anything to help one another, to help each other, and they get it. And how do we as adults mirror and model what that activity is and bring that all the way back into what's happening in our local city hall or in our local planning commission or school boards? How do we make that active?
Other thoughts on this connecting the dots between neighborliness and bigger acts of civic engagement?
Yeah,
Joe.
let me jump in here. I'm the analyst for this data, so this may be controversial, but I'm also an Oklahoman, and I'm just right next to you. I think there is some bias in the question, especially the social connections. I think if they ask, in the past 12 months, did you help your neighbors do something positive? There are a lot of people I know that would have done something but would not answer that way because of humility and because of the way we're raised. Let me just throw that out there, and I think you need to take that as is, as Arkansas, as well as Oklahomans. This is just how we're brought up. But I think also we need to remember we're interdependent. We're interdependent at every level of our life. Personally, our communities, our organizations, our work, everything. So we need to constantly remind ourselves we're interdependent and that we need to share our values, our systems, everything with everyone and be able to receive stuff back. And I think that also goes into thinking about being a civically engaged person and the responsibility that we have as American citizens to be civically engaged. And I think one of my favorite anecdotes is when Ben Franklin, coming out of the Constitutional Hall after they signed the Constitution, was asked, "Are we a monarch or are we a republic?" And he says, "We are a republic if you could keep it." And I think you need to think about that every day. I think you need to instill that into our kids in civic education. We need to instill that in new immigrants coming over because it is our responsibility. It is not the government's responsibility. It is ours.
Great. Shana?
I would follow up on Jeff's just to say, I agree. I think the data, we need to be careful and we need to also ensure that we're having the dialogue about what does neighbor mean to me. And I think that speaks some as well to religious affiliation and some of that data that we saw. Neighbor may mean my congregation. It may not mean the person that lives across the street. So I think we need to be really conscientious of that and thinking through what does neighbor mean and how are we engaging with our neighbors in that space. And making sure that we're having that conversation in a way that brings people to the table. So that we can kind of continue down that line. And I always say, we had the privilege of doing disaster work at Engage. And, in that space, when a disaster hits, we see the best of humanity. But also there's a great deal of organization and practice and preparedness on the front end by all those that are leading those initiatives. And so when it strikes and hits, we show up we're told exactly where to go, what to do. The path is easy. We all lay aside our differences. There's a central focus, and we can do that. And it's like if we could flip the switch on how to make that happen in civic engagement, in volunteerism, in voting, wow. You know, because just think about it. I mean, every neighborhood, every city, every state, when that strikes, we know how to respond and to behave in that moment in those places and spaces.
I think, well, I'll say this, you know, for rural communities in the Delta, Elaine, we're one neighborhood. You know, we're one community. And, you know, our community saw that level of civic engagement during the election and understanding their power. And for those who don't know, you know, the night that, you know, I was in a runoff at the general in November and a runoff in December. And that night, you know, I was down by 4. The next day, we had 17 provisional ballots to count. And it was blood, sweat, and tears, you know, myself and my opponent sitting there, and text messages coming in, and you know, the community, we got this, we got this. But before that, the day before, the civic engagement was on full display. There was, you know, neighbor calling neighbor, go pick up so-and-so, pushing someone in a wheelchair down the street. And someone who came to vote, I mentioned it earlier, who brought her oxygen tank and wheeled in there and voted. And that next day, you know, counting 17 ballots, and I prevailed by 3 votes. And this community, a lot of them who had never voted before, first-time registered voters, saw their power. And now no one will be able to take that power away from them. So they're engaged in talking, and how do we move forward with this power that we have gained, not realizing that it was something that was missing as a part of the community, is being able to, you know, vote for someone who was willing to include them in the process. And then, you know, when I spoke afterwards, you know, the day I was sworn in, was that this is our administration. This is us. This is our administration. We did this work. And my quote unquote campaign manager, I call her Black Nancy Pelosi. I'm telling you, she counted those votes and she said, we need 10 more. Get on the phone. Let's get on the phone. And she got on the phone and she got 11 more people to come out and vote. And I won by 3. And that morning when we were going up there to count the provisional ballots, she said, you're going to either win by 2 or you're going to lose by 2. And I won by 3.
Overachieved.
Overachieved. So the community is now engaged.
Well, I'm gonna stay with you, but I also want to bring others in on this, because we're going to start talking about solutions now, and I think we've begun to hint at them along the way. But one of the things that's discussed in the report is that in a lot of our communities in Arkansas, there are not good civic spaces to come together. That you got to have some physical spaces, as well as the broadband access that Mayor, you mentioned earlier. Could you talk a little bit about, and I think we probably in Councilmember Agnew and Mayor Gilbert, we're literally and figuratively at 2 ends of the state, right? In terms of the quality of the access of public spaces, et cetera. But I would love you all to talk about the ways in which having good spaces or not having good spaces can have some real ramifications for how well a community works. Either one of y'all can get started.
Well, so I think this question about civic spaces, kind of like if you think about all the policies and decisions, all the politics, that's the decorations inside a house. That's your interior design. But your house has to stand, right? Like your foundation has to be there, and that beam that cuts across the middle of your living rooms, your house doesn't fall down, right? Like that's those 3 votes. That's that very core sort of civic soul of your residence. residents. And, when I got elected in 2020, I was asking some questions about our code and our ordinances, local laws that are passed, and that's our code. And I was like, well, I'm curious about this, and I want to find that. And our sweet clerk was like, well, you can come on down to my office, and I'll go into the file cabinet in the back, and I'll get it out for you. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? And she was absolutely dead serious. And so it was just in 2020 that we put our city code online. And I was shocked by that, just from an access to information and transparency standpoint. But just because the code's online doesn't mean folks can get online to access it, right? So then you have to start at the beginning of what does it mean to build the civic spaces, physical and digital. And I think the report touches maybe more on the physical spaces. So much of what space means, both in the context of my work at Walmart and access to things, it's an omni experience. So it's, you're all here, your phones are all here, you're here digitally and physically. And so it's both. How are we opening up and making access to our civic spaces? I'll pick on Bentonville City Hall for a quick second. It could not be more bifurcated in terms of where we seat our elected officials relative to where we seat and how we invite public comment in that space. It's uncomfortable if you're coming in and sitting in the audience. So fortunately, we've allocated some funds. We're looking at a redesign of City Hall. Part of the reason to do that isn't because I want a better chair, although it'd be awesome if my chair didn't fall down halfway through a meeting every time. But because I want a space that invites residents to feel part of their government. And so there's so many small ways that can happen, and there's so many small ways that doesn't happen, right? So yeah, I think the digital and physical spaces, but the slide that was showed about just transparency of information, where you'd say, do I have to physically go somewhere and ask a person to have that information, or can I gain access to that information myself? I think we're seeing a massive change in that right now in Arkansas, and it's a really positive thing for residents and for citizens.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, all of our documents, there's mine's probably about 5 times worse. Nothing's online, nothing's digital. It's all paper, in boxes, in storage spaces, everything, not even with our police department. So, and then we have a safe, and, Elaine's more than 100 years old, and wading through documents 25, 30 years just to find something from 2020, has been very challenging. So that's one of the projects we're going to work on. In regards to space, I had residents who said they had never been in City Hall. How can someone have lived in Elaine for 34 years and never been inside City Hall? They, put their water bill right through the slot. And that was, and that was one of the things. This is your space. This is your space. And we made sure that when they enter into City Hall, it's welcoming. There's the first person they greet sets the tone and welcomes them in this space. There's seating. I'm very particular about my elderly community, about, those who help raise me. When they come, I stop, drop, and I'm coming to see them speak. And they come in, they sit, they engage, they talk. And, making that space available to them, welcoming and asking them what are their suggestions. Asking the kids, what are your suggestions about the park? Our schools closed in 2006, and at that time, the Arkansas Department of Education donated one of our VOTEC building for use for our children, for tutoring, for programs. And for 17 years, those spaces were filled with items people were storing in there. 4 months after I was in office, cleaned them out. Those spaces are now used for tutoring. We're getting ready to have our senior dinner for our senior citizens. We have spaces available for them to use, and that's the purpose for them. So making sure, and now we have space to civically engage them with so many different things. So having space, and we have to create those spaces, but making sure we have those spaces that their government is inviting them to is critical, especially in rural communities where there's not a lot of space available. So any of the small communities, and I've reached out to so many of them, making sure, and we've talked about this a lot with some of the other mayors, making sure we have those spaces where we engage them and having an extra space for our children to go to and our young people. And again, making sure they come and help us design those spaces and help us decide what those spaces look like.
Right. Shana.
Yeah, I would just say, I think as we work with mayors, that's a big concern across our state, just having space to be able to bring people in. But it's also, I think, goes beyond that. I think we need to be mindful of the fact that our civic spaces have a significant impact upon health. And when we are not providing spaces for people to not only get services, but to connect with people that are different from them, to connect with resources, whether it's food bank, whether it's the library. Nate just slipped out, but I do want to give a significant shout out to libraries, and we need to be really mindful of the fact that policies, things that are happening currently are not just about the contents of what is inside those buildings, but it is having significant impact upon access to those buildings, opportunity for those buildings to be a safe public space for people to gather and dialogue. And so I think we need to think beyond that. We've seen some neat things happening in some communities like Fort Smith, El Dorado, Little Rock, larger metro plans, of course, but where we're also creating outside spaces for people to simply come together and gather. They're fun. They have to be mindful of that, look for creative ways to connect our citizens beyond City Hall, but also in some of those safe spaces. Again, I think this is where we have not done a good job of engaging corporate Arkansas in the dialogue around, if we are going to get serious about building health equity in our communities, that safe spaces and civic spaces are necessary for that. And especially as we have an aging population, we continue to see a decline in senior centers, the quality of those centers. And again, that's a population that has significant influence, has the ability to share a tremendous knowledge, expertise, lean into tutoring, all those things that significantly impact a community. But if we are not caring for them and ensuring they have places to build health, then we diminish the overall civic engagement.
So sadly, we're down to our last couple of minutes, and I do want to get back to civic education because I think that's a really important piece, and we'll have to cut it a little short. But I did want to say that, this at the Clinton Presidential Center, we're really reorienting all of our civic education and civic engagement work around this issue of civic health. And what's great about this report is it does provide us some real marker of whether that work over the long haul is having a payoff. And so that's really been helpful in us reframing our mindset here over the years ahead. But Jeff, just some brief high points of what you're seeing in terms of those states where civic education work is really paying off the most.
Yeah, as I mentioned, Florida, but I think it's not just paying off, but let me talk to you about the availability of best practices and also things that have been developed by our CHI partners. I mean, Annette Strauss built a curriculum around civic education. Alabama, Dave Matthews Center in Alabama, another civic health partner, developed a curriculum for coaches who a lot of them are civic teachers in high school. These are things that you have access to now. You've always had access to it, but now being part of the civic health family and have done the, email me, I'll make these connections and you'll get these, all these great, wonderful products because everyone is struggling with civic health or civic education. Is it mandatory for just 1 year or one semester to having it mandatory K through 12? There's only a few states that actually have that. There's wonderful things like iCivics. You go online, do stuff like that. But it's really, I think it's more important to be taught in the class in every subject. You could teach civics in chemistry. You could teach the civics in, PE. You could teach civics in almost everything. So I think that's what needs to be done. And
you can teach civics at every grade band too. It doesn't have to be safe for ninth grade. Yep. It's important at every level. And teachers at all those levels need professional development. They need
Yes.
resources.
Yeah.
And that's where I think places like the Clinton Center can really become a player in that regard, because I think that's really a crucial
Yep.
piece to the puzzle.
As a son of a teacher and a brother of a teacher, and knowing teachers' salary is not that great, and they have a lot to actually do. I think if we develop and support them through giving them their curriculum of civic education, teaching them how to do this, maybe alleviate some of that stress that they have every single day.
Indeed. Well, in all these regards, the work begins today. But we got a lot of folks who are committed to this. And to talk about where we go next, Janet Harris, Executive Director of the Winthrop Rockefeller Institute, is going to come up and talk a little bit about next steps.
Thank you, Jay, and thank you for moderating the panel and for such great input from our panelists. Let's give them a round of applause, please. And thank you, Dr. DeFrancesco Soto, for your leadership here and for your great partnership with the Winthrop Rockefeller Institute and the Central Arkansas Library System and Engage Arkansas on this report. I am so excited about today to have this information in hand, and I hope that you all are too. But I want to thank you for giving of your time, because you all came out today to ponder the promise and the possibility of civic engagement in Arkansas and civic health in Arkansas and what we can do about what we know. But my challenge to you is that now that we are equipped with the learning, it is time to get to work. And so we have to ask each other what we're going to do about Arkansas civic health together. And that is part of the role of the Winthrop Rockefeller Institute as we move forward into the next year. I do want to echo the comments that were made earlier about all of the partners who contributed to this report. But I especially want to ask, if you were an author on this report, could you stand, please? I know several of you are in the room. Dr. Richards, Chewell, Brittany, Kwame, thank you so much. Joyce, thank you for your work. It's really important to have this research and this data. So the Winthrop Rockefeller Institute, you know, I've heard some comments today about civic spaces and structure, and how do we put people together and invite them into a conversation in the room across differences of opinion and around really complex issues that have no easy solution. And that is what we are proud to do at the Institute every day. Our mission is to continue Winthrop Rockefeller's collaborative approach to creating transformational change. And that just means we bring people together to work together on solving problems and creating opportunities in our state. So today, I'm proud to announce that because of the work of the Civic Health Index report, we will be launching a new program called Civic Arkansas at the Winthrop Rockefeller Institute. This will include a series of convenings and listening sessions all around the state, discussing both the findings of this report, but also creating plans of action, because it is clear that we must get to work. And during these facilitated discussions, we're going to pull together thoughtfully concerned Arkansans like all of you and many others and engage them in our process. We will imagine ways we can strengthen civic health in our state by encouraging people to talk across divides, to talk to each other about solutions, and to have a space and structure in which those solutions can emerge. We know, we work at the Institute, and for those of you, we've got many friends in the room who have been to our programs. We work on a variety of issues important to Arkansas. But at the foundation of all of those is civic engagement, because unless we are working together, we cannot create transformational change on any issue. And so this initiative, Civic Arkansas, is very close to our hearts. When Governor Rockefeller gave his farewell address to the people of Arkansas almost 52 years ago, he laid out his hopes for the state that he would come to love and call home. And one of the things that he reminded us of that is perhaps truer today than it was then is that every citizen has a duty to be informed, to be thoughtfully concerned, and to participate in the search for solutions. But then he said, Only by working together can we make the contribution necessary for building the future that we all yearn for. Those words from Governor Rockefeller will serve as our guiding principle for Civic Arkansas, and we need all of you to get involved. So today, on the launch of our Arkansas Civic Health Index report, I'm pleased to invite you to be a part of Civic Arkansas by visiting the Winthrop Rockefeller Institute and the rockefellerinstitute.org/civic-arkansas. Let us know how you want to get involved. Let us know your opinion. You'll be able to link out to the report from there and to get involved in all of the initiatives that we have planned, including listening sessions in our communities and convening on the mountain and all around the state so that we can imagine a stronger Civic Arkansas together. And I want you to be able to stay up to date on that work. So thank you again to the report creators and funders and supporters. Thank you to Jay and our panel today, and thank you to all of you for coming, and may you have a very joyous holiday season so that we can get to work on Civic Arkansas in 2024. Thank you very much.